months ago, I made a video discussing the presence of the PLA along the Oregon coast. And I've since seen not only that video, but any other video that addresses this topic demonetized. However, that's not going to stop me from discussing it here on YouTube. So, I'm going to color my language a little bit. If you've watched my other videos, you've heard me get very detailed. And I've mentioned the interview that I did in 2007 with Leon. And then there's my video, Fourth Horse Rising. So this is what I want you to keep in mind. I'm not trying to freak you out. This is just, take a look at what's really going on. Now, we just had an 8.2, and they downsized it to a 7.9. That triggered a tsunami warning on the west coast of the United States. It was months prior to that, and you'll have to look up these articles for yourself, because even to actually read the text of those articles, for some reason, is coming up as flagged. As more support grows on the on-demand channel, we'll be expanding the amount of geopolitical coverage. But essentially, we have the Chinese military in a joint exercise with the United States at a place called Camp Riley. Don't you find it kind of odd that we have all these tensions in the South China Sea, and I can go on and on. And then those videos, that adds even more concern when discussing things like this, which is real news, not fake news. When that's demonetized, you have to ask the question, who's pulling the strings of YouTube now currently to make sure that videos that get into things like this are buried while superficial conspiracy fake news rises to the top of the feed? Then also look at the main figures, the top folks in the alternative media that are on YouTube, that are ranking really high. What are they covering? Are they covering these things? Just to keep in mind, it was back in 2012 that League City, Texas was training police from China in American law enforcement tactics. Not only that, the police chief in League City, Texas traveled to China to learn Chinese secret police tactics. And there's video from their own YouTube channel of the Chinese police doing ride-alongs and engage in firearms training. And I noted that Infowars.com never touched that story. And even though he and others have raised a fuss about certain things and geopolitical realities, they've twisted things. And they've even given a lot of hype to some stories that may not have had a lot of validity. Again, while discounting the ones that do. So why? Why is China outside Astoria, Oregon? And then how does that tie into the tsunami? Earthquake disaster relief. And this has been ongoing for several years in Hawaii. For several years now, maybe at least back as far as 2012. So you can almost, this really should be made into a documentary to reach the world in multiple languages. But it's important that people understand and see the mapping of all of this. Jerome Corsi wrote a book, America for Sale, and there was a lot of really important things that were in that book about America being sold out and the purpose of the privatization of certain things. And if you look at what's happening today, I don't see them raising the same concerns about the privatization of the national parks that can end up in foreign interests. And so I think that there's a lot of concern on the part of nation governments as to how they're going to get their money back from the United States, and there's a plan. So in my home city of Portland, Oregon, and there's pictures, you can take a look for yourself in some of the reports, they're at a hotel outside the airport, and then you have the Chinese officials with U.S. officials in this, it isn't exactly a war game exercise, but it might as well be. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter there's just 100. They're gathering intelligence, and it's the desensitization. Years ago, Alex Jones would talk about things like this. His earlier documentaries, police state documentaries, covered things like this. Notice how it's drifted from that. Even America for Sale. I'm trying to reach many of you that are out there, not be your foe. This information, I think, is pretty critical, and I think that we're being distracted from it. Now, I produced a longer video that I'll link to. Check out the suggested videos at the end of this. And the Oregon shanghaiing episode that I produced back in 2014, during that period in which I went back to Portland, I was living in a teardrop camper, but I still brought back my TV show. I always found it significant for a number of reasons. That Portland at one time suffered from a kidnapping epidemic, and that seems to have links to the current problems and social ills in Portland, which includes a high level of attempted abductions of women in the Portland area. I don't think it's a safe city. So I've been talking about this on videos for years, that the crime on that level, that type of crime, as the snow melts here, is increasing. There was an underground, and so loggers, miners, sailors. In a future video, I'll show images and maps of specifically where these things occurred and its proximity to the Willamette River. Then you can understand, with Portland really being only so many miles, under 100, about 60, on this path that leads out of the Columbia into the Pacific Ocean to Astoria. During that time when the crimping was going on, which was the shanghaiing of men that would wind up in Portland, loggers, miners, sailors, other workers, they would find themselves in the brothels of Old Town Chinatown, usually tricked by a prostitute in some cases and slipped a roofie, or in some cases just knocked out by a bouncer. They would find themselves, this is true, you can watch documentaries about this on YouTube. There are people that give tours, some people exaggerate, but it's a very bloody history of not only in our nation, but specifically Portland, which was very much a port town, not right there on the ocean, but again, if you're traveling by boat, I think about all those boats that come in for the 4th of July. Say hi to my Portland viewers and friends that are watching at this time. You see the Rose Festival. Those boats come in. It's not a big deal for those big boats, Navy boats, to come right in and dock at the Willamette River. It's a big, big show. Fireworks and all, celebrating the military-industrial complex. But what about holding those accountable that have outsourced the technology to these growing Asian nations of the East that are preparing for war with the West? How deep does the corruption go when a nation that's actually considered to be an enemy, which is the reason why they've increased the defense budget, why then are they docking at the Oregon coast? There's also another story about the Chinese Navy docking in Britain. Do you remember that? That was earlier this year. These seem to be signs. It almost seems to be ritualistic. And there's even a predictive programming element to it. Just like movies, and I talked about movies, predictive programming, and Red Dawn, and how China strong-armed Hollywood to change the enemy in the Red Dawn remake in 2012 to the North Korean threat. It was in 2007, 8, and 2011, 3 interviews I did with Leon about his reoccurring nightmare of the invasion. It would be in 2013 that publicly I would project that 2025 is what I consider to be the red zone, no pun intended, because war cycles and solar cycles tend to go together, and the physical events and preparatory actions for war and the Satan II missile developed by Russia and the other things that are taking place. And there's skirmishes, and any mention of certain Middle Eastern countries or what's going on in that country that starts with an S, again, these videos demonetized. And why is that? Why don't they want us talking about things that relate to American security, national sovereignty, freedom? Notice how the gun issue is coming back. We all know, for those of you that are on the level, the most practical use for an AR-15 in the future, if these events come to pass. Notice how they want to focus on that specifically, and they've been doing it for years. Breitbart put out an article in 2012 saying China wants the American people disarmed. And I don't normally cite articles from Breitbart. And there are other articles like that. And in that same time period, where they displayed their long-range missile capabilities, which far exceeds that of North Korea, but the catch is both those nations got their technology from the West. So, I mean, to me, this is the ultimate rabbit hole of our generations. While people are distracted in a circus without even realizing that the social media giants know that conspiracy theory sells. It sells so well, they made a TV show out of it, and then started making a joke out of certain topics. And so when a lot of people just gravitate to conspiracy theory, oh no, man, oh, right now, There's just a whole buffet of bad information, more so than when I first got into this. So the Portland, Oregon area suffered from a homeless, or rather a kidnapping epidemic in the 1860s and 70s, and Astoria was the sister city, and this is the same area in which the PLA is operating. And are we to not think that they're operating on an ongoing basis just because there's not, an announced drill? That's pretty deep. This would also be the appropriate time to recall, I think it's called the Hike Hotel. There's a hotel that's being financed by China in Portland, Oregon, in the South Ross Island waterfront district. For those of you in Portland, we've seen this area boom and boom. In recent years, a CBS News report cited that China was responsible for holding up the California housing market in a big, big way. So these are things to consider, right? Hopefully this video isn't going to put out any red flags in the future. I want to show overlay maps. But you can go ahead and I give you some coordinates. You can follow the links. You can look up the drill. You can look up where the drill took place. Camp Riley, I believe, near Astoria, Oregon. Then look at some of the images of the shanghaiing routes where the men were shanghaied out of Portland, and again, corrupt sailors of various sorts. Forget the exact technology, but the people that ran the ships and the crimping game would literally buy people. They would literally work it out with the crimps, just like a pimping deal. And they would literally work to dupe people and sometimes get their signature on a piece of paper. Say that they would work out to sea. And some of them never survived. But they called it Shanghai because the destination was for Asia. That's very interesting. That's very, very interesting. You know what else is interesting? It's the Shanghai tunnels. That's the underground, underneath the Old Town, Chinatown area. It seems that X marks the spot. So I'll be back with more. Please subscribe if you're new. Check out Patreon if you want to become a monthly subscriber. And I think that we're going to have to keep our eye on the story.